introduce you to the president of our company, Dan Stenerson. So Dan, I've been told in the past, and you've probably heard this term as well, but own occupation, it's the sizzle that sells the steak of a DI policy. My question to you, is that really the case? I know there are many definitions of disability in the marketplace, and here we have a few, and if you would be so kind to briefly touch on each one and how they would work if they were on a DI policy.
That's great, Ben. Thank you so very much, and I am so happy that you're bringing this subject matter to the forefront for our producers to get a better handle on this type of terminology. You know, really and truly, the definition of how you're going to be disabled, what we term the disabling definition, is to the DI policy what our heart is to our body. It is the central point of a DI contract. This directs the acceptance or approval of somebody actually going on claim or not, depending upon if they can do their job. Now, the 4 definitions that you have up there, let's talk about them. And of course, I love the order that you have that in. At the very top is the true own occupation definition. And quite simply, in a nutshell, if one cannot do the duties, and most specifically the important duties of your occupation, and you choose to go back to work in another occupation, the carrier will still pay you as much benefits as you qualify for based on the amount that you purchased under the policy, irrespective of how much income that you're receiving in your new occupation. So in a way, you could consider that a double dip. You go back to work in another job, you get your full benefit, and plus you get all the income that you earn from that other occupation. That is probably the most ironclad definition you can find in a DI policy. And that's pretty sizzling and appealing. Next step down, we're talking about the transitional own occupation definition. And really and truly, all that is a benefit or a disabling definition that will allow you to transition back to work. Now, unlike the Own-Occ, where the true Own-Occ allows you to go to another job and get as much income and total benefits as possible, the transitional Own-Occ will only allow you to receive up to 100% of what you were making prior to claim. Again, the true Own-Occ is kind of a double dip. The transitional is just 100% of the income that you're receiving prior to claim. So if you do go back to work under the transitional own occupation definition in your occupation or another occupation, what will actually happen is that your benefit will decrease based on the amount of coverage or the amount of income that you make. As an example, if you're making $10,000 a month, and let's say you have make it simple, a $10,000 DI benefit, and you are totally disabled, you're going to receive that full total benefit. But if you choose, based on your own volition, to go back to work in any occupation, your occupation, another occupation, you go back to work, and you're making $5,000 after you return to work, then what they will do is reduce your benefit by $5,000, the amount of money that you made on your income. So you'd actually receive only a $5,000 benefit. Okay? Third one down, modified Own-Occ. Well, modified Own-Occ is not a bad definition. The modified Own-Occ basically says your inability to perform the important duties of your own occupation and not gainfully employed. So the carrier's not going to force you back to work, but based on your ability to go back to work, your doctor says, no, you can't. They won't try to push you into an occupation that you've never been in before. You'll still get a full benefit if you totally are disabled and you stay out of work. And then, of course, the last definition is your regular occupation. If you can't go back to work by way of education, training, or experience, then you may not qualify for the full benefit because the carrier may come back and say, well, wait a minute, you're a college grad, or you're experienced in a particular field, or your training will allow you to go back to work in another occupation. Therefore, because of those 3 things, we're not going to pay you a full benefit. We find that definition more often than not in the blue-collar marketplace. Does that answer your question, Ben?
Yeah, no, Dan, that's great. So you just talked about the 4 definitions that most agents out there that sell DI, one of those 4 is going to be available for them to put on their client's policy. Now, each definition I want to point out that there comes a cost with each one of those 4 that Dan just talked about. So the true Own-Occ, because you can double dip, because it's the best available definition, it's also going to be the most expensive. So if you're trying to sell a DI policy to your clients, you really need to figure out and think, is it worth putting the strongest definition versus the cost? So Dan, in your experience, in your 32 years of being in this industry, which professions would you identify as the ones who would really need that true Own-Occ definition? Who should you be selling that to?
You know, I like to think about professions that incorporate some type of manual dexterity. And I see on the screen here we have 2 good examples, surgeons and dentists. You know, they need their fingers. Maybe that surgeon has perfected a special knot. Or maybe there's a procedure that he does that requires absolute command and control of the manual dexterity of his fingers in order for him to do his occupation or the duties of his occupation. Certainly would be true for a dentist. Now, just because they may not be able to use their fingers doesn't mean they can't go back to work in a productive specialty and practice medicine or dentistry. But if, in fact, they were insured with the own occupation definition, that very top definition, and they could not use the manual dexterity of their hands, however, could go back through residency and do another specialty, a different specialty, such as an internist or family practice, or maybe we're talking about a psychiatry residency or something else that didn't require that manual dexterity, they still could collect the full benefits under their contract no matter how much money they made in a new residency. Your third bullet point there, anyone whose job requires a unique physical capability, that potentially could happen to the non-physician dental marketplace, but it's pretty rare. For example, take my case. I would be considered by an underwriter an insurance agent, and the duties of an insurance agent would be pretty much administratively based, which is transferable from industry to industry. So for me to have Own-Occ doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because I work with management reports, I work with clients, which would be my producers, I'm on the phone. All those duties are transferable to another industry, and therefore Own-Occ doesn't really make any difference at all.
Well, thanks, Dan, and that kind of transitions nicely into our next point here is what you just pointed out for yourself as being an executive with managerial duties and office duties. The true Own-Occ may not be as valuable to you as it is a surgeon or a dentist that has that or needs that coverage, because if they lost that manual dexterity, they're potentially losing out on a lot of income that they trained for so many years. So if you wouldn't mind, please share with the agents and brokers across the country that we have with us today about why you decided to change the definition on your personal DI policy.
Well, that's great. Thanks. Good question. So in looking at these policies, we know that they're non-cancelable, guarantee renewable, meaning that the carrier does not have the privilege or ability to increase the premium. So really the trick is to buy these policies as early as you can in life, in your 20s, because that's the time that they lock and load the rate per 100, and it'll never go up. Now, wouldn't that be wonderful to say that about our health insurance, or LTC? We're seeing all kinds of rates escalate in those two areas alone. Well, I did that at 24. I bought a policy, and I locked in as one of the provisions the own occupation disabling definition, so that if I was never able to do my job and I went back to work in another job, I would still receive the full benefit no matter how much money I made in my new job. Well, what I saved is, 25 years later, after paying for that premium, I did have an aha moment, and that moment was understanding, really, based on my dialogue with many claims examiners, understanding that my duties that I perform in my occupation, being those duties that are administratively based, are transferable. So what is it about my occupation that I couldn't do but I could do someplace else? And really and truly, I couldn't come up with an example. So what I did is I chose, after having the policy for 25 years, to take off the own occupation definition, which saved me 15%. Now, you might not think that, $600, $700 a year is that much savings. But really and truly, over the course of the time that I've owned the policy, we're talking $15,000, $16,000, $17,000, which I would have much rather have put into a permanent life insurance plan or a 401k or an annuity or some other vehicle that would have returned that investment to me. Just did not make sense. I don't believe the own occupation definition makes sense for any occupation that has administration as its core responsibilities, such as business owners, many professionals, not all, but many. And so therefore, I think this is a real good area to look for savings. And we're all trying to look for different ways where we can provide coverage to our clients on an affordable basis.
Yeah, Dan, that's great. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, yeah, that's I love it when you explain that to the agents out there that sometimes are struggling on whether or not to add that definition when they're getting a quote request for DI, because as you pointed out, it might only be 15% savings, but that could make the difference in the sale. And by the way you present it to them, that's going to be some serious savings over the period of owning that DI contract. So that kind of leads in nicely to our last slide here, folks, and that is we want you to stop losing the sale due to the price. And Dan and I can both attest that, and I'm sure some of you out on the line today, that DI is not necessarily cheap. It can be an expensive product. So any way that we can save the client money but still provide them with a strong definition of disability, like the one Dan talked about, the modified Own-Occ, we want to do that. We want to help you. And that's why we firmly believe that modified Own-Occ definition is so strong, because the client will be paid their full benefit as long as they're not working. And the carrier is not going to force them to go back to work. So I want you to feel comfortable and confident when you choose that definition that you still are presenting a very strong policy to your clients. So you also save them money. And as Dan alluded to earlier, there really are only some specific professions out there where you would always want to include that true Own-Occ definition. Is there anything you'd want to add to that, Dan?
Yeah, I would say, just to, again, recap on that modified own occupation definition, that truly is a strong definition. Again, if you can't do the duties of your job, nobody's going to force you back to work. Based on your own volition, you go back to work. If the doctor still says you can't do your job and you don't go back to work, you're going to receive that full benefit. If you choose to go back to work, you're going to swing into the partial benefits of the contract. So, that's a very, very good thing to always remember. Any business owner that you're working with, I don't think they should have the own occupation definition. It's overkill. It's extra expense. And then the other thing I want you folks to always remember is that not every policy in the marketplace will allow you to choose the definition, or the disabling definition, I should say. Some contracts come, depending on the carrier, with that own occupation built in. Well, if you're in competition, and if a case is made that you really don't need that, you're going to perhaps have some heavy justification to do from a premium standpoint, because it will be more expensive than a contract that does not have Own-Occ. So make sure when you're talking to your DI distributors that you have the flexibility of being able to provide Own-Occ or modified Own-Occ in any given proposal that you run for your client. Ben, I think that's about all I have. I'll turn it back over to you.
Dan, that's awesome. Thank you again for joining us today and sharing your story. You bring a lot of insight and experience to all the agents that are on the line with us today. And you guys, that's what DIS is really all about. We want to help you. We want to educate you and get you to be more comfortable when you're out there selling and talking about disability to your clients. That's why we want to do these quick 10-minute webinars to give you a different sales strategy every week. So we went a couple minutes over today, but I really think it was worth it because this topic is very important. And we want you to give us a call if you're not sure when you should or should not add that true Own-Occ definition. As you can see on the screen here, we've got our website. You can go there. You can request quotes. You can get articles, more sales ideas that we've put together. There's also recorded webinars in the past, so if you enjoyed this one today, I encourage you to log on and listen to some past ones that Dan and I have done. And as always, our 800 number at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to call us. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing everyone back here next Wednesday. So that being said, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.